And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on conversational competence, a step-by-step approach. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is Executive Leadership Coach and Professional Development Consultant, Ms. Jill Schichter. Jill, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and hello, everyone. We have a lot to cover today, so let's start with the agenda. And I'm trying to get the agenda to work, and it's not. How are we going to do this, Kelly? Because for some reason, it is not moving.
Maybe check and see if it's on pause or go back into your presentation, into your PowerPoint. There you go.
Let's try again. There we go.
There
Thank
we
you.
go.
All
Sure.
right. So we're going to talk about resolving workplace challenges, key conversation principles, how to create safety in a conversation. We'll talk about difficult or important conversations, a 5-step approach. We'll talk about how to conduct great one-on-one meetings, and then finally conducting success reviews, also known as performance reviews. So here are some examples of challenging situations in the workplace gathered from conversations with many people over the years on common issues in the workplace. And I've put 4 of them up here, and see if any of these sound familiar. Not everyone on the team is pulling their weight. My employee Joe is a negative influence on the team. I keep running into the same resistance from the same person or department, and Mary's performance is subpar. She consistently misses deadlines. Now, sometimes these situations are a result of or made worse by either an important conversation that you're not having, or a conversation that you did have and it wasn't handled as well as you would have liked. So what I'd like to do is a little poll, and I'd like you to choose a challenging situation which sounds familiar from the list below, or choose one of your own. And it's important that you choose something and then remember what you've chosen, because we are going to revisit this at the end of the webinar and see how you might change your conversation based on the tools and approaches that you've learned during the next hour. So Kelly, I'll turn it back to you for the poll.
Definitely. I just launched that, so everyone please go ahead and make your selection, and then we will get those results in just a few seconds. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It looks like most of you have already made your selection. And the results are about 27% for not everyone on the team is pulling their weight. 21% my employee is a negative influence on their team. 34% for I keep running into the same resistance from the same person. 12% for employees' performance is subpar, misses deadlines, and 6% is the other.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. So hang on to those examples, those situations, and we will come back to them later on. So let's talk about some principles of great conversation. And this is what I like to call the communication circle. And it consists of 3 things: the internal self, which is your mindset, our verbal communication, and nonverbal communication. So let's start with the mindset. The first one is give up the need to be right. If you're the kind of person who has very strong opinions about something, pardon me, you feel your way is the right way or the only way, then your conversation is going to get stalled right from the get-go. So you want to enter a conversation with giving up the need to be right, and then being open to possibility and being curious and being non-judgmental, so that you really do want to hear the other person's point of view. Again, this is all a mindset before you go into the conversation. You also want to assume the best intentions in the other person. So regardless of what may have gone on, there may be some kind of conflict that you've had with this person, assume the best intentions. People don't come to work consciously wanting to ruin somebody else's day, to tick somebody off, to do a bad job. Assume the best intentions in the other person, and also assume that the reason why you may be having a conflict is because you haven't had the right kind of conversation to be able to express each other's points of view. Also, what you want to do, again, before you go into the conversation, is anticipate a positive outcome. Sometimes we're so afraid of a negative result that we just don't have the conversation at all. So if you assume the best intentions in the other person and anticipate a positive outcome and you go in non-judgmental, then your chances of having a successful conversation are greatly increased. And here's one of my favorites, and that is practice requirements thinking. So what is requirements thinking? It's when you base your decisions and your priorities on requirements, which is essential factors for getting the job done, versus preference, the way we like things to be, tradition, the way things have always been, and convenience, the way it's easier to do things. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what happens when you practice requirements thinking and when you don't practice requirements thinking. Let's start with the first one. So this is Dennis Rodman, a very colorful, non-traditional, to say the least, basketball player who had a very successful career with the Chicago Bulls. And that was due in large part to a fellow named Phil Jackson, who was the team coach for the Bulls. And Jackson's team was losing year over year. He was a master at practicing requirements thinking. He sat down with himself one day and he said, what do I need to win? What do we need to win? And he really took a look at the needs of the team and the gaps on the team, and he decided that what was missing was a really good rebounder. He did not have that kind of skill on his team. So he looked around the league and he realized that Dennis Rodman was the best in the business when it came to rebounding. So he went to his team and he had quite the reputation, Dennis Rodman, in the league, but he went to his team and he said, I'd like to invite Rodman to the team. What do you think? And the team, despite the reputation of fights with teammates and fights with referees on the court and all kinds of bad press, they wanted to win as much as Phil Jackson wanted to win. And they said, yes, please invite him to join the team. And that included a fellow named Scottie Pippen, who was another star player on the team, who actually had a scar on his face as a result of a fight that he had gotten into with Rodman years earlier. So Jackson went to Rodman, and once the press got hold of this and once the fans got hold of this, they started screaming and yelling and saying, are you crazy? And this will be nothing but trouble, and it's going to bring shame on the team and on the league, and on and on and on. But Phil Jackson was really focused on requirements thinking versus preference, tradition, or convenience. He knew it wouldn't be convenient to have Rodman on the team. It was going to require a lot of managing. It may not have been a preference on the part of the fans or the players to have somebody with Rodman's type of personality on the team. However, and certainly he was non-traditional. However, he was focused on requirements thinking, so he went to Rodman and he said to him, I'd like you to play for the team. I have certain conditions. Can you meet them? And he very clearly laid out for Rodman what the conditions were. And if Rodman couldn't meet those conditions, then it was thank you very much. It was nice having the conversation with you. And he would go around and look around the league for another rebounder. And those conditions were things like you will show up to every practice, you will show up on time, you will not get into fights with the referees, you will not kick over the water bottles, etc., etc. And Rodman said, okay, I can live with that. And the Bulls went on to win championships year after year. So that's an example of what happens when you practice requirements thinking versus preference, tradition, or convenience. There's another story, and this is a personal story of several years ago. I was part of a team that was called into a company that was having a huge retention problem. As soon as new bright young folks walked in the door, they were walking out the door and they didn't understand why. Now this company, if I told you their name, which I won't, but if I told you their name, you would associate them with innovation. Absolutely known for innovation. They were known for that as part of their brand in the marketplace. It was part of their employment brand, which is why they were able to attract the best and the brightest. They were really considered an employer of choice at the time. And what happened is that these best and brightest would enter the doors, and they entered a very bureaucratic organization that was really very traditional. And they would, if they had a new idea, they would go to their manager, and either their manager would say, that's not the way we do things around here, or we tried that once 5 years ago. And by the way, if you ever hear that, we tried that once 5 years ago, it didn't work, or, you know, that's not the way we do things around here. That is a company that is not practicing requirements thinking. So the young best and brightest would get really, really frustrated because their ideas were not being considered. If, however, the manager said, okay, yes, we'll float it up to the top, the idea would be floated up to the top, a very bureaucratic organization, which would take forever to get to the top. And by the time it got floated back down, which again took forever, the idea looked nothing like what the originator had proposed. And so folks were getting really, really frustrated, and that's why they were walking out the door. So that's an example of when, if you do not practice requirements thinking, you will lose momentum, you will lose innovative ability, you will have a retention problem, and your company will stagnate. I want to challenge you to practice requirements thinking. If you're trying to make a decision, ask yourself honestly, am I thinking about this from a place of tradition, convenience, preference, or is this really serving the best needs of the business? And I would also challenge you, if you're in a team environment, to ask your team the same thing if the team is making a decision together. Challenge yourselves about which place you're coming from. And if you're not coming from a place of requirements thinking, then you won't achieve the success that you want to achieve. Then there's nonverbal communication. So the first thing is body language, and there's tons of books that are written on body language, and you can tell when somebody is getting upset or shutting down. As a person's face will get red, their fists will clench. If they're impatient, you know, their foot will start tapping and so on. And so you can read into all kinds of body language, and you do need to be careful about how you interpret body language. For example, in North America, if somebody is sitting or standing and they're crossing their arms in front of their chest, it usually means the person is holding back or withdrawing or not happy, etc. However, in other cultures, that particular stance is actually a very common position, and it feels very relaxing in other cultures. So again, you do have to be careful, and that goes back to not making any assumptions and being curious about the other person and being curious about their body language. Breathing actually is a form of body language. For example, we take very shallow breaths when we're upset, or we sigh when we're aggravated. So again, you want to sort of listen not only to the other person's body language and how they're breathing, also pay attention to your own breathing. And if you're going into a conversation where you're going to be feeling stressed, a great simple breathing exercise for calming both the nervous system and the brain is a timed breath where the exhale is longer than the inhale. When you exhale, when your exhale is even a few counts longer than your inhale, signals are sent to your brain to adjust your nervous system. So again, if you're feeling nervous, just exhale a little bit longer than you inhale. And of course, other signs of nonverbal communication would be signs of disinterest or disengagement. Somebody's not looking you directly in the eye, they're looking above you, behind you, around you, they're looking down, they're tapping their fingers, they're tapping their foot, they're kind of glancing at their watch or their phone. So again, these are, you know, obvious signs of disinterest or disengagement. And then interpreting silence. So if you're saying something to somebody and they're not answering you right away, don't jump in to fill the void. Some people actually are processing information. They need to process information, they need to think about what you've just said, and then they need to think about how they are going to respond. So allow the person time to process, because some people are processors, and allow them to take a minute or two just to formulate their thoughts. Again, don't jump in to silence assuming that the person didn't understand you, they're not interested, or you feel uncomfortable with silence. Allow the silence to breathe. And then we're going to talk about verbal communication and how we speak. I used to work with the Franklin Covey organization, and the founder of the company, Stephen Covey, wrote a great book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits, which is one of my favorites, I like them all, but this is a particular favorite, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand the other person's point of view before you share your own. And you do that for a number of reasons. One is because it helps you establish a relationship with the other person when you're not anxious to jump in with your own story first. And the second is, depending on what the other person says, that may help to modify or shape or adjust what you want to say. So you can gain valuable information if you spend some time listening to the other person before you speak. Another great thing to do when you're establishing a relationship with somebody and starting a conversation with somebody is just ask, what do we both want here? Establish a common purpose. You can retreat to that if the conversation gets uncomfortable. You can go back and say, wait a minute, let's just step back for a second. What do we both want here? And remind yourselves of why you're having the conversation in the first place and what your end goal is. You want to also acknowledge and appreciate similarities, not just differences. For example, I was once doing some work with an organization where one company had acquired the other company about 3 years earlier, and they were still operating as two completely separate entities, and they were having huge issues with collaboration. I was working with an IT team from both the acquired company and the acquirers, and they walked into the room and there were round tables in the room and people were sitting at the round tables, and of course the acquired folks sat at one set of tables and the acquirees or the acquirers sat at another set of tables. So the first thing I did was mix everybody up. And the second thing that I did was I asked them, because there was such tension between the two groups, I asked them to start talking about the similarities that they had, ways that they did things that were similar, maybe not exactly the same, but similar. Also the personality types. What were some similarities, or even in people's hobbies? Just what were some similarities amongst the people sitting across the table from them? And as they started to look at similarities and not on the differences, which is where they had spent much of their time, you could actually feel an energy shift in the room as the conversation moved from contentious to actually really, exploratory. There was a real discovery mode. And it ended up with the teams actually talking about ways that they could collaborate together. Once they got to know each other a little bit more, once they realized that they weren't all that different after all, and that their main stumbling block was they were just holding on so tightly to their own traditional ways of doing things that they couldn't see the bigger picture. So again, acknowledging and appreciating similarities, not just differences, is a really good communication technique. We all hold valid truths, so you do want to solicit opinions and ideas all the time, not always offer your own. Ask others what their opinions, thoughts, and ideas are. And if you are a manager, that's actually a great technique. Sorry about that sound. A great technique for helping to build and motivate and encourage growth in an employee. It's a great development technique. You also want to acknowledge intent and impact. If a conversation is not going quite the way you want it to, what you'll want to do is be very conscious of the impact that you're having on the other person. And you may want to restate what the intention of the conversation is and acknowledge the impact that you think you're having on the other person. Intent and impact is really quite critical. And similarly, if somebody is saying something to you that's not making you very happy, what you might want to do is say something like, I know it wasn't your intention to embarrass me in that meeting, for example. It wasn't your intention to embarrass me in that meeting. And when you did this, here's the impact that it had on me. So again, being very aware of intention and impact, both on your part as well as on another person's part, is really important. And here's a great conversational tip, and that is the yes and mindset. If you attend any webinar or program or read a book on conversational principles, you'll usually find that there's a recommendation that you not use the word but, and that you substitute the word but with the word and here's why. If you say something like, I know you want more time to complete the project, but the deadline is looming, science shows that people will only hear what you have said after the word but. So the only thing people are going to hear is the deadline is looming. And it just means that the conversation, the door's being slammed shut. If, however, you say, I know you want more time to complete the project and the deadline is looming, that is a door opener. It invites additional words into that sentence. I know you want more time to complete the project and the deadline is looming, so let's talk about how we can make this work. And if you put the word yes in front of the word and, then it becomes even more powerful. How many times in a meeting have either you said or you've heard somebody else say, yeah, but, when somebody else is talking? Yeah, but. Essentially what you're doing is negating what that other person is saying. As opposed to saying yes, so you're acknowledging that you've heard the other person, yes, and I have another point of view to share. So the word and is a door opener. The word but will slam the conversational door shut. If you do nothing else but walk away with the yes and technique, you will have gained a lot. You'll notice an enormous difference in the conversations that you have with people. Let's talk about how to create safety in a conversation. So the first thing is you want to use non-confrontational language when you disagree. So rather than saying things like you don't know what you're talking about, you might want to say, I have a different perspective. You also want to focus on why things are being said rather than reacting to what is being said. So for example, if somebody is being sarcastic to you, rather than reacting to the sarcasm, step back for a second in your own mind and just say, okay, why is the person being sarcastic? And then you can ask some questions about what's going on here. And I'll teach you some good questions to ask in a confrontational conversation. And then you step back from the dialogue if necessary to create safety. And this is a very simple and very productive, very useful technique. So you want to step back. You literally say, can we step back for a minute? You step back from the dialogue to create safety, and you clarify or you restate the intention. That goes back to the intention and impact conversation we had a little bit earlier. So for example, you can say something like, can we step back for a minute? It was not my intention to upset you, and yet I fear that was the impact. I wanted to have this conversation with you because I really value your input. Wait times at the counter during tax season has been a long-standing issue, and I figured between the two of us, we could find a solution. So you're acknowledging intention, you're acknowledging impact, you're using the word and you're saying, can we step back for a minute? Just by those very simple words of can we step back for a minute, again, helps to reset the brain. It takes you out of the situation, the uncomfortable conversation that you're having. It diffuses the tension as you both step back and you talk about common purpose and what you want to create together. Another example would be, you're having a conversation with somebody, the dialogue is getting heated, and at this point, once that happens, then you start getting into blaming, and that blaming hinders problem solving. So you can say something like, can we step back for a minute? The discussion is getting heated. I feel like we're getting into blaming. That was not my intention. Let's revisit the reason why we're having this conversation in the first place. And then you talk about what you're trying to accomplish, what the common purpose is, and so on. So a very, very simple technique. When anything is getting heated, just step back. If you're going in circles, if a meeting is getting stalled because you're either getting into blaming each other or you're just revisiting the same topic over and over again and getting nowhere, if you find you're going in circles, just say the simple words, can we step back for a minute? So just to summarize this particular section of the webinar, what do we both want here is a great technique. I'm genuinely curious, no rushed judgment. I don't have all the answers. I assume the best intentions. I anticipate a positive outcome. I have the yes and mindset, and you step back if needed to create safety. And let's not forget requirements thinking in there as well. Now here's where I'm going to give you a 5-step approach to conduct difficult or important conversations. Planning a conversation is really critical, and because people are people, it may not go exactly like you plan, The other party or parties may have different ideas about, and they may go off on a tangent. This will help you, though, help keep the conversation on track. It also prepares you mentally for the conversation and keeps you open-minded and curious, as opposed to going into a conversation with preconceived ideas and in blaming mode. So if you need a difficult or important conversation to go really well, you're going to sit down with yourself and ask yourself 5 questions and write out the answers, because there's something about writing out the answers that helps reinforce in the brain the action that you're going to take. So the first thing you're going to say is what is happening. And you're going to be very specific about the situation. 1 or 2 sentences, that's it. If you go longer than that and you start to go into a whole big song and dance about what is happening, then emotion is going to start getting into play here. And what you want to do at this stage is just be very factual. What is happening? 1 or 2 sentences. Then ask, why is it significant? Who or what is being affected? How do I feel about it? And be very specific about the feeling. Using a word like I'm upset doesn't really say anything. Embarrassed, afraid, words like that are a little bit more specific about the feeling. What do I want to learn? So don't assume that you already have all the answers, that you know what's going on. By asking, what do I want to learn? Then you're avoiding that whole idea about going into a conversation blaming, going into a conversation with assumptions. It's keeping your brain open-minded. What do I want to learn? What do I want to discover from this conversation? And then finally, what do I want to be different? What kind of outcome are you looking for? So let's use an example. Here's a conversation between a manager and an employee. And the situation is that Joe has sent a proposal to a potential client. The document contains many errors, and the potential client has called Joe's boss, Mary, to inform her of the errors, and Mary now has to speak with Joe. And so she's going to map out the conversation with Joe. And by the way, it's important to note that this is uncharacteristic performance for Joe. If it's characteristic performance for Joe, that's a different kind of conversation. So something has happened here, proposal sent to a potential client. It's an issue, the client is not happy. So again, the 5-step approach is what is happening? Why is it significant? Who or what is being affected? How do I feel about it? What do I want to learn? And what do I want to be different? And remember that as you're planning the conversation, you want to be genuinely curious, no rush to judgment, assume the best intentions, anticipate a positive outcome, have the and mindset, and step back to create safety. So as Mary is writing out her conversation, she could say, my coordinator was sloppy, and that is actually a judgment statement, as opposed to being very specific and factual. An important document wasn't proofed before sending to client. That's the situation. Why is it significant? What's at stake? Who or what is affected? Mary could say, we appear unprofessional, we might not win the business, we might lose respect. How do I feel about it? She could say, I'm upset, as opposed to saying, I felt embarrassed when the client pointed out the errors and concerned that we would lose the business. That is being more specific about the feeling. And then what do I want to be different? I want to ensure we have a good quality control system in place, and I want to be kept informed if there's a workflow issue. So here's how the conversation could play out after she's written it out. Joe, I want to talk to you about the proposal that went out to ABC Company yesterday. They called me and pointed out that the document contained several errors. It was pretty embarrassing, and I was concerned that we would lose the business because we appeared unprofessional. You've always been such a solid performer, so I'd really like to understand what happened here. And you give Joe an opportunity to reply. He either gives an excuse, an explanation, he apologizes, or stays silent. And then Mary would say something like, let's figure this out together. Is there an issue with workload or process? What do we need to put in place to ensure we maintain our reputation for quality? The purpose of this conversation is not to assign blame. The purpose of the conversation is to find out what happened and ensure that it didn't happen again. And bringing Joe into the conversation and asking him to help find a solution gives Joe the opportunity to redeem himself. So again, you're not going into the conversation with any sort of preconceived ideas. You're really being open and curious and asking really good questions to find out what happened and then to resolve the issue. Let's talk a little bit about one-on-ones, one-on-one meetings, and the conversations to have in one-on-ones. And we'll talk about some common mistakes that people make. First of all, do you do most of the talking in your one-on-ones? And if you do, as long as you're talking, you're not learning anything you didn't already know. So what you want to do is make sure that you're leaving room for the other person to do the talking. Be very conscious of how much talking you are doing. Another common mistake is taking the problem away from someone. And again, this is a really good and important development point. So if somebody asks for your opinion, wait and say something like, I'll share my thoughts before we end our conversation. For now, let's keep exploring yours. What you want to do is encourage people to come up with their own ideas and to really go into solution mode rather than relying on you all the time. So if your tendency is to jump into the conversation by taking the problem away, you're doing the employee a disservice and not really helping them to grow. If your tendency is to cancel your one-on-ones, that time is very precious. Even if your one-on-one is only 15 minutes, canceling meetings, canceling those one-on-ones sends a signal to the employee that they matter less than whatever else it is you might be working on. And granted, there are times where you do need to cancel a meeting. However, those one-on-one times can be quite precious, especially if you conduct the one-on-ones really well. And so be very conscious before you cancel meetings and avoid getting that reputation of he or she cancels meetings all the time. And also you want to make sure that you don't allow interruptions because that will impact the flow of the conversation. And here are some great questions to ask during a one-on-one. Open-ended questions. What's the most important thing that you and I should be talking about today? How is this currently impacting you? Who or what else is being impacted? What's the ideal outcome? What difference will it make? What's the first step that you can take to resolve the issue? Who else needs to be involved? Great open-ended questions for a one-on-one. And then finally, how are you doing and how can I help? I mentioned before that I worked with the Franklin Covey organization, and Stephen Covey and I were talking about managers versus leaders. And he said something that was, and I think it's in one of his books, he said something to me that was just really profound, and I've remembered it to this day. He said, the difference between a manager and a leader is a manager says, what are you doing? And a leader says, how are you doing? And how can I help? Very profound. And then once you've concluded your meeting, have the employees summarize what they heard. Have your employees summarize what they heard. How often has it been that you've had a conversation with somebody and you think you've agreed to something and then it just sort of falls by the wayside? By having the employees summarize what they heard and then walking away with action items and deadlines and then marking deadlines in your respective calendars to follow up at your next meeting, it will ensure that things get done and the employee can live up to their commitments. You'd be surprised how many times, people who think that they've walked away from a meeting, understanding exactly what was required, because they did not summarize what they heard, because they didn't check it out with the other party, they've walked away with a completely different idea of what went on in that meeting and what commitments were made. And I thought I would throw in a few questions here that are really good for one-on-ones and for team meetings as well. These are great open-ended questions that open up dialogue and foster creative thinking. What is the one area that if you made an improvement or we made an improvement would give you and others the greatest return on time, energy, dollars? What is currently impossible to do that if it were possible would change everything? It's a great brainstorming question, actually. And if you were hired to consult with this company, what would you advise? great open-ended questions that help to open the brain and foster a really open-ended dialogue. Performance or success reviews. I am on a mission to remove the words performance review from everyone's vocabulary and replace it with success review. And the reason why I want to do this is because the conversation then is about attaining success, not assigning blame. A success review also implies that you're going to communicate consistently throughout the year, rather than saving for a year-end performance review. You want to also ensure that your feedback during this success review is timely, so you're not talking about something that happened 6 months earlier when the person can't remember what they did. You want to make sure that it's specific, and that's the other reason why you don't want to leave it too long before bringing it forward to the person, because you do want to be specific about what happened and what needs to change. And you also want to be sure that you limit your feedback during this success review. So if there are 5 or 6 different things that a person needs to work on, just choose 1 or 2 for now, so that they can achieve success, and then they can deal with the rest of them later on. You also want to determine during this success review if any issues are due to motivation, ability, or variables beyond the employee's control. For example, if a person needs a new computer, for example, and there's just no room in the budget this year, that is beyond the employee's control. So by asking questions about how the person is feeling, how they're doing, what concerns do they have, and coming from the mindset of success, that will help you determine whether the issue is motivation, ability, or variables beyond the employee's control. Again, thinking about the word success in the back of your mind helps to shape the conversation as opposed to performance review. Now, when you walk away from a success review, some of the outcomes are that the employee should know how job responsibilities relate to and impact the goals of the business. So they need to understand the impact that they're having on the business, their most important responsibilities or tasks, when tasks must be completed, how well or to what level they need to perform the tasks, and any assistance to be expected from the manager. And when you have that kind of conversation, which is based on success, those are some of the outcomes that the employee will walk away with, some of the hard outcomes. Some of the softer outcomes are that the employee will feel that the manager is more interested in creating success than finding fault. The manager has their back. The manager recognizes that the employee has knowledge and ability to achieve greater success. The manager believes in me. And this is really important too. You do want to say to the employee, I know you can do this. I have great faith in you. I know that if you follow this, you have great potential, to help the person understand that you have their back and you believe in them. And the other outcome of a success review is the person will have a shared sense of purpose with their manager. So again, I'm on this mission to change it to success review instead of performance review. So let's revisit the challenging situation. Not everyone on the team is pulling their weight. My employee is a negative influence on the team. I keep running into the same resistance from the same department or person. The employee's performance is subpar, consistently misses deadlines, or other. And I want you to think back to all of the things that you've learned over the past 45 minutes or so. And I'm going to ask you to think about what tools or approaches will you use moving forward to resolve the situation that you identified earlier, or for situations moving forward. And you can choose as many as you like. This isn't a typical poll, and what you'll do is you'll type in your answers and choose as many as you like. The reason why I'm doing this, that I'm asking you to make a commitment to action, is because when you attend a webinar or a training session, it's really easy to feel really good and motivated and inspired during the session. and you walk away all excited, but unless you make a commitment to action, unless you actually write down what it is that you're going to do, then some of the benefit of the learning session can be diminished. You do want to walk away with some practical tools, and you do want to make a commitment to doing something different, especially if you identified that this is a challenging situation for you that has not yet been resolved. So what I'd like you to do is think about these tools that you've learned today, and which will you commit to using to resolve the situation you identified earlier, or for situations moving forward. You can type in as many as you want. I'll just recap them for you. Use and instead of but. Plan the conversation, 5-step approach. Practice requirements thinking. Assume positive intent and anticipate a positive outcome. Ask, what do we both want here, to establish common purpose. Solicit ideas first before offering solutions, so ask these open-ended questions. Conduct success reviews. Ask open-ended questions during one-on-ones. And step back to create safety. And there may be others that you've picked up along the way. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly, and please type in as many as you like of the tools that you're going to commit to using.
All right, thanks, Jill. Yeah, if you guys can type those into the questions option now, and then we'll go ahead and review those. I'm seeing a lot of the use and instead of but, plan the conversation, step back to create safety. A lot of people have multiple actions that they're putting down, which is awesome. Assume positive intent, plan the step 5 approach. Again, a lot of the use and instead of but. Yeah, a lot of great answers here.
That's wonderful. And again, it's a question of you, if you've written something down, not only to write it down, but after this webinar is over, put down beside what you've written, put down when you are going to do it. So it's not just making a commitment, yes, I will do this. You're also saying, and I am going to do it by such and such a date. And with that, that concludes the webinar, and we can open it up for questions. Kelly, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill, for presenting on behalf of New Horizons. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type those into the questions menu option that you were just using, and we'll go ahead and ask Jill those and address those over audio. In the meantime, I'd also like to just inform you that today's webinar is being recorded. You will all receive a link to view today's session recording, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation to go back and review any of these helpful, useful tips that you learned today. Also want to point you guys to our website at newhorizons.com. There you will find our Center for Leadership and Development, where you can find all of our upcoming courses on various topics. So please visit our website at newhorizons.com. You can also find our upcoming webinar schedule under the webinars link there, and you can register for any upcoming sessions that are all complimentary to you. So Jill, we do have a few questions coming through. The first one is, if the success review needs to be ongoing, can a one-on-one include a success review, or should that be a separate meeting altogether?
It absolutely can be part of the one-on-one. As a matter of fact, you may want to, it's a great question, because during a one-on-one, depending on how long your one-on-ones are, you may always want to include a component of addressing success, acknowledging, giving a compliment, whatever. It's a really good idea to establish positivity in a conversation. So yes, absolutely, success can be incorporated into a one-on-one.
All right, and the next question we have is, how do you address an employee who appears to be unmotivated?
Well, that's when you use the 5-step approach. So the situation is that the employee appears to be unmotivated. You want to think about how you feel about it. What's the impact on the business? What's the impact on other team members? And what do you want to learn? That's actually going to be the pivotal question for this employee when you're having the conversation. Why are they unmotivated? Ask how they feel about their work. What concerns them? Ask them what motivates them. What they like and don't like about their job. What they like or didn't like about previous jobs. Where they hope to go in the future. What do they want to do? You want to ask a lot of different open-ended questions. That question of what do I want to learn is going to be critical in that conversation with the employee.
Okay, and do you have any suggestions if someone really doesn't think that the other person has the best intentions?
If somebody doesn't have the best intentions, um, that's an interesting question. It would depend on why you felt the person didn't have the best intentions. If you can be a little bit more specific, if you're thinking of a specific example, because there's so many variables here when somebody doesn't think that somebody else doesn't have the best intentions. What behaviors did they exhibit? How do you feel about it? What's the impact again, on the business? Does the person who asked the question have a specific example in mind? I do
Yeah,
firmly believe, by the way, that people do have the best of intentions. They may be completely unaware of their impact. I really do believe that most people have the best of intentions, and part of the problem is people just don't understand themselves. They really are completely oblivious, and I've seen this time and time again, completely oblivious to the impact that their behavior has on other people. And sometimes when you point it out to them, they are stunned. They are absolutely stunned. Some people have absolutely no clue, even though you think it's glaringly obvious, they really don't have a clue. And yes, Kelly, I think the person typed in some more information.
they haven't yet. I was going to go ahead and move to the next one, but you had so many other great thoughts, so I wanted to let you finish.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if you would like to add more to that question and be a bit more specific, and we can go ahead and dive into that. The next question we had was, how would you approach a person that thinks they are always right?
Hmm. Well, the first thing is to go back to what do we both want here? What do we both want here? When you bring it back to the situation at hand, rather than who is doing what or how they are doing it, when you come back to establish common purpose, then you can revisit how you feel about something and really be curious about why the other person feels the way they feel. And you can get your point across as well. So if you're dealing with somebody who feels that they are always right, go back to, okay, great. What do we both want here? What are we both trying to accomplish? And how can we best get there? Again, you want to take it away from the personal, because there are going to be people who feel who don't have these great tips that we've learned today, and are really do not want to give up the need to be right. And again, just bring it back to what do we both want here, and also to let the other person know that while it may not be their intention to make you upset, the impact of always wanting to be right, you do want to express the impact that it's having on you, not in a blaming way. Again, that's why intention and impact are very important and go hand in hand. If you just talk about impact, then it's blaming. You're making me feel this way, as opposed to going back to intention and assuring the person that they probably do not want to make you upset, and this is the impact that your words are having on me. And I do want to get us back to our common purpose. Always go back to common purpose.
All right. Thank you so much, Jill, for all of your time today. We're going to go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had quite a few questions of people requesting the PowerPoint presentation. So once again, just a reminder that I will be sending out a PDF of that document later today for you to take away all these great tips that were given. So thank you so much, Jill. We always enjoy having you.
My pleasure.
And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you'll join us for future webinars. Take care and have a great day.